Mic test 1, 2.
Yeah, so the mics will be at the table. In a few minutes time. Yeah, let me give you my card first. Yeah. No, no problem. Yeah. Oh, you came the 2 days, right? Okay, yeah, I understand. Oh, you're based in Singapore. Okay. So as long as you got one of the cards from the SGInnovate people, my colleagues on the brand team, that's fine. Yeah. Yeah. It looks like it's very well connected. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Ambassador is not coming, is it? Okay. The reason why I'm asking is I said she's the only one I need to address. The rest of them are ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. I still have to maintain a certain.
Mic test 1, 2.
Yeah. Oh, is it? Yeah. Yeah. Actually, the European ones I found are quite formal. So. Yeah. Oh yes, very. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so maybe we can take our seats. Let's see how do we want to do. Because Mark has got the longest presentation, the longest opening. Maybe I put him at right at the back. Yeah. So you guys will just present, and then and then Mark will present the last. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Neil, Kasia. Yeah. Excellency, nice to meet you. Nice. Nice. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. 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 I think we have met before at one of the when DTM. Yeah. Yeah. I think I was sitting in front because it was DTM Taman that was there. That was that year. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. There was a lot. Yeah. Yeah, that was yeah, it was great. Thank you very much for coming. I know you're busy, and yeah, we should be starting soon, so we. Yeah. Is this your first time in this venue? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'll take you. I'll moderate the session. I just came back from Europe, in fact, so I'm still a little bit jet lagged, but that's okay. Mark tells me that no, I can't be more jet lagged than Mark is, so I'm no excuses there. That's it. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, shall we get started? Maybe you can just. I'll sit there. I'll sit here, and then you guys can sort of sit around there. No protocol. We'll probably get Mark.
Yeah.
Mark, perhaps you can take a seat here. What I'll do is I'll let them all introduce, and then you'll be the last one to introduce yourself, and then you will have a chance to speak on your, present your slides and all that sort of thing. And I will stop you. Okay. Where is Chuhan? Chuhan is Uh, ladies, ladies and gentlemen, perhaps we can get started. Thank you very much. Okay, I know we have a very we have a very full session. Had a chance to speak to some of the panelists before coming down here, and I realized that they've got a lot of information they want to impart. So best that we get started. First of all, Ambassador Vono, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon. Thank you for making the time to come down to BASH, which is actually one of two places that SGInnovate actually has for community events. Most of you may be familiar with Carpenter Street, but there is a reason why we are here today and not at Carpenter Street, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. For those of you who don't know anything about SGInnovate, I'm going to give you the elevator pitch as to what we do, so that you get a better appreciation as to why you're here, why we are doing this. SGInnovate, our focus and our objective really is to help scientists, entrepreneurs build great deep tech companies from Singapore for the global markets. And we do this in one of four ways. We invest, obviously, that's my title. I'm head of investment, so investment is very dear to me, very important. But after we invest in companies, what we do is we help them to grow through venture building by adding resources such as business, technical knowledge, networking, global connections to a global ecosystem. We also have a talent networking group that looks at talent globally to help staff some of these startups. And finally, we have, last but not least, is a very important component of what SGInnovate does, and that is community building. Now, what we believe in is that deep tech is deep tech for any country, whether you're doing quantum or autonomous vehicles, and therefore you cannot afford to be just looking at a local ecosystem. We need to build ties globally, we need to build ties at a global level, and that's one of the reasons why we're so happy today to have this connection with the Netherlands, to bring down very senior people from the Netherlands to come down and share their experiences with us. So without further ado, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, and they will share some of the experiences and knowledge that they have. It would be great if this could be an interactive session where after they introduce themselves, you guys have lots of questions. I've got some questions prepared here, but I'm told that this is too formal and this is a very Singaporean thing to do, so I may just choose to just ask questions off the top of my head, which always gets me into trouble. So without further ado, let me just introduce my first panelist, Mr. Loh Chi Han from he's Vice President of SMRT, as well as To Get Asia. So again, I should have checked this document before I introduced him. So I'll let Mr. Loh speak a little bit on what he does.
Testing, okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored to be invited to this panel. I think I was told about a few days ago that I'm here, sitting here together with these very well established gentlemen and a lady here. So I come from SMRT. I'm into autonomous vehicle. Before that, I spent many years in operations and maintenance. I don't know if you need me to explain what SMRT does. It is, I think, for the benefit of some of the foreign friends, SMRT is the public transport operator in Singapore, one of the two, for multimodal transport. So this part of the business, I think many of the audience here would know. But SMRT also runs other businesses, startups. They have an investment arm called Momentum that seed out value startups and work with them, partner with them. As we speak, we are also in talks with quite a number of these companies. I myself is representing the autonomous vehicle parts of the business, and in 2016, SMRT, and to get there, a Dutch company manufacturing autonomous vehicle and provide autonomous vehicle solutions for many years in the Netherlands as well as Middle East. Why SMRT and to get there? I think that was pure foresight, because at that time we didn't know that Singapore and Netherlands under the KPMG is the world's leading Autonomous Vehicle Readiness Index, ranked #1 Netherlands and #2 Singapore. So it is a perfect match. But at that time, we sort of like foresight. We have seen to get there and the value of this company, and very established. And so we, as a PTO, with many years of operating and maintenance experience, find a very good partner that provides autonomous vehicle solution, and hence we try to find a market within Asia Pacific. I think that's all. I will not steal the time for the rest of the panelists.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Loh. The next is Mr. Niels de Boer, and I've got to read it off because he's got so many titles next to his name. He's the Program Director and Future Mobility Solutions Autonomous Vehicles at NTU. He also is a Director of the Energy Research Institute at NTU and runs the C-Trans testing circuit at NTU.
Yeah. So thanks. I'm Niels. So I have a Dutch passport, but I've just realized that as per this month, I have lived longer in Singapore than in the Netherlands. So I'm not sure where I belong more. So I've got two hats on. One is Program Director for Future Mobility, and that looks a little bit in general and R&D in mobility in the context of urban solutions within AVRI. So we're running a whole bunch of projects, research projects. So at the moment we're starting off a research project together with some colleagues from Siemens, which we have here, looking at smart infrastructure for autonomous vehicles. We have in the past run a one-year project together with SMRT as well as JTC, looking at mobility as a service trial, because our campus from the university, we have about 20 to 25,000 people living on the campus there, and up to 50,000 people on campus during the daytime. And we run mobility as a service as a trial where we looked at combining buses, and that is the normal NTU green and blue routes, taking into account mobility on demand buses with SWAT, e-scooters, bicycles, both electric as normal shared bicycles, and running mobility as a service trial under the name Jalan. It has been quite successful. It has been successful enough that SMRT spun off a startup called Mobility X, has now released an application called Zipster, and even got investment by Toyota Tsusho to kick off this program. So I think it's a good example where a trial within a university led to a spin-off and a quite successful project. My second job, which actually takes much more time because I'm working with Singapore effectively, indirectly for the Land Transport Authority, is CITRAN, the Center of Excellence for Testing and Research on Autonomous Vehicles. So what we are really doing is helping to develop the technical regulations and the technical requirements and technical standards for autonomous vehicles to test on public roads, because it's very challenging. You can and that is in many areas. You now have a lot of new technology, whether it's autonomous vehicles or finance technology with blockchain, or whether it is at the moment telemedicine. You have a strictly regulated environment, and you try to bring in technology which is completely going against all existing regulations. And then the question is, how do you do that? So Singapore in general is running a kind of sandbox where you have a legal sandbox where you can test autonomous vehicles. I know of 3 legal sandboxes. There might be more. One is for autonomous vehicles. One is for medical solutions running by Ministry of Health, allowing telemedicine. And there is one in finance technology running by the Monetary Authority of Singapore, looking at all fintech solutions. And we are effectively using the sandbox to develop the regulations. So technology developers like Autonomy are using it to develop their vehicles and the technology. We are working together with the LTA to develop technical regulations so that once the technology is mature, the regulations are mature and they can be sold. Because quite often at the moment, you're coming into a situation where you have new technology, new solutions, and you try to deploy it, and the answer is, sorry, it's not allowed. I've seen it in many other areas. A good example in my previous career is I was working for Vestas, and they worked with an UK defense firm called Kinetic, and they made a wind turbine which had blades completely invisible to radar, so a wind turbine wouldn't interfere with the radar of an airport. 2 million euros spent, 1.5 years, a working prototype, perfectly viable. Aviation regulator said at the end, sorry, you can't do this. This is not allowed. And it all came because they only spoke to the regulator once the technology was proven. So what we're trying to do here is effectively bring the regulation a bit early so that once the technology is mature, it actually can be is ready to be deployed and used commercially. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Niels. The third panelist, Dr. Kasia, is a research scientist with Autonomy. Autonomy, as most of you will know, is one of the few success stories, hopefully one of more to come in Singapore in the autonomous vehicle space. They were sold to, or rather Active acquired them a couple of years ago, I think. A year or so ago. Okay, so that always tells me that a different date. Kasia, please take it away.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kasia, Katarzyna Marczuk. I come from academic background, so I've done my PhD in mobility on demand and transportation topics. I've been working here at NUS and at MIT in Boston, and then in the lab where we were developing autonomous vehicles in Singapore. And then one day we actually were thinking that, oh, we are doing it in the lab, it's a very nice toy. What if we do it for real? And this is how Autonomy has started. And then since then we've been working as Autonomy, and we deployed, currently we have around 15 cars here in Singapore, we have around 10 in Boston, we have operations in Las Vegas, around 50 vehicles running every day under Aptiv. Aptiv is a company who acquired us. And I am working mainly on the deployment strategies of autonomous vehicles, like how do we operate a fleet of cars, whether actually autonomous vehicles bring, what benefits autonomous vehicles bring to us, and how actually we can assure that the benefits are actually there when we deploy the vehicles. So we want to test all the scenarios and strategies to make sure that we implement it the best way we can.
Okay, thanks, Kasia. I promised at the start to explain why we are here rather than in the center of town near all the bars and restaurants at Clarke Quay and Boat Quay. And the reason is because this area here, One North, is actually one of the, for those of you who may not know this, is one of the areas ring-fenced by the Singapore government as a sandbox where autonomous vehicles can actually run alongside normal vehicles. And Kasia, you probably know more details of that.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just give you a minute more to talk about that.
Yes, and we actually have, I'm still on, right?
Yeah.
And we have our office here at One North, so if you are around, you can see our cars. We are driving every day, so we're testing our cars. We have around 50, 60 kilometers here. We can drive around, test, along with normal traffic signals, all cars, pedestrians, jailwalkers, and whatever else we can find in Singapore.
Okay, thanks, Kasia. And last, but definitely not least, Mr. Mark Frequin, Director General for Mobility, Ministry for Infrastructure and Water Management from the Netherlands, who will actually take a little bit of time to explain what the landscape is like in the Netherlands, and I believe he has some slides. So, Mark, please take it away. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Sorry, panelists, I'm using a couple of slides behind you. It's wonderful to be in Singapore, and some of the people we met the last couple of days are here in the audience. So it's absolutely a warm welcome. Thank you for giving us some insight in what you're doing. Just a couple of things about the Netherlands and Singapore. As already you told us, we are both on top of the readiness for autonomous driving. And it's not purely a technical reason, it's also about behavior, about acceptance, about what people want in a country. And that's one of the things I want to touch upon for the debate. So yes, on the left and the right side you see we are both in the leading countries of the world. So yes, we need a bridge between Singapore and the Netherlands, and it's a long one, as you know, for it's a long distance. But you always have to think cross-border. So in the middle you see the Netherlands, located in the northwestern part of Europe. We cooperate with Belgium, we cooperate with Germany, and of course we name it the tulip for some touchy Dutch. Another point to bring in, and certainly after a couple of days here in Singapore, if you don't know what kind of answers you need, you can talk a long time about autonomous driving, but if you can't link it to the traffic jams or the CO2 reduction, your climate issues, and in our case, I think a little bit more than Singapore, but nevertheless, we have the same. The chance that we get flooded is a reason to approach it. So you need new answers, and if you don't link the questions to the opportunities of autonomous driving, you're missing the boat. So what we try to do is find solutions using the infrastructure we have, like in Singapore, around public transport nodes, looking upon the first of last mile. And yes, we have the advantage of having a lot of bikes. For those who don't know the Netherlands, we have more bikes than inhabitants. And if you want to try to bike in Amsterdam, don't do it if you come from Singapore. But using the strong part of the structure, and I think Singapore has the same advantage, you can build upon that, and then you come to buses, you come to climate solutions from solar to wind. Sorry. I'm going. You need a link between at least four things. It's about people, so it's not about the cars. And again, listening to a lot of you in the last couple of days, I think we should give, it's also for our case, give attention to the people who make use of the cars, of the solutions. How to link it to your infrastructure. I think the vehicles become more important than the infrastructure, but it's the link between. It's, in our case, relevant to link it to climate solutions. So becoming more electrical is part of getting autonomous driving, and in the end, you have to find solutions for your data. And that's the most interesting and the most difficult one in our case. So this is our climate agenda. In 2030, all new cars in the Netherlands have to be electrical. And in the heavy trade for freight, it's a little bit more difficult, so it will be a combination of hydrogen, biofuels and electrical, and we experiment now and we try to roll out it so that in 10 years time we get a zero emission solution in the field of mobility. And there's a nice link, as I said, between autonomous driving and becoming fully electrical, and we make clever use of it. But the big change in the whole mobility system is that you go from the driver to autonomous. You go from separate modalities, so it's a train or the car. Now it's the car and the train and the bike and being pedestrian, and we even look upon the system of drones, hyperloops and self-driving bikes. How to go from fossil to zero, how to go from owning a car to share a car, and how to link the physical infrastructure to the digital infrastructure. And that's the plan we have for the next 20, 30 years. And we try to find a link between Singapore on one hand and the Netherlands on the other hand. And the other friend we have is in California. There are three parts of the world that are most promising if we look what is happening in the field of mobility: Singapore, California, and the Netherlands. Looking upon innovation, it should be a combination of a starting with mobility as a service. If you don't have the approach from the side of the traveler, the person, and also the freight, you're missing the boats. And there you need digital solutions and automated options. We experiment like Singapore a lot. So we're looking at the test beds. That's one of the reasons to be here. Can we share all the knowledge using all the test facilities? And we can add up, but we think we can make more of it together, and we'll end up how to combine it with smartphones, payment systems, and a data exchange. Making clever use of what is possible. We're still in the 4G generation as Singapore, and we're going up to 5G. And we're moving from the license for the driver to the license for the car. And that's a big change in how to approach it. And we end up, we start with traffic lights that are becoming more intelligent, like your lamp poles, but we end up without traffic lights, where you don't need them in the near future. So that's the way we move forward, and it's all around the person who wants to have the answer in the field of mobility. Access, it can be a smartphone, but it can be other solutions as well. How to make a reservation, how to combine your option, how to pay for it, how to make clear there's space in the bus, a seat in the train, how to get a new car, or if you arrive at a train station, can I make a reservation for a bike? It's the concept we're changing, and therefore we say the whole mobility system is going upside down. We used to give all the attention to the infrastructure, and we now have to give all the attention to the traveler, and then go down what you need. This is our king, not driving a self-driving car. So if even our king is willing to drive a self-driving car, not using his hands at the wheel, it should be possible for the rest of the inhabitants of the Netherlands. Going to that, autonomous driving and self-driving cars are not new. We already do it, as in Singapore, for more than 10 years. So the interesting question I got in a lot of meetings, what is your target? In which year will you have autonomous driving all over? We already have it. So let's not talk about the year 20 or the 22, but how to move forward. That's the difficult one, and we have all concepts. This one is a separate track, that's the easy one. Truck platooning, we already do it in the harbors like in Singapore. It's the most promising one. So make a start where it's really possible, and then we have to change it to the system. Sorry. As I told you, it's in the end, legislation, and the difficult one about legislation, as in Singapore, in my countries, the legislation is of the past and you have to address it for the future. So make it possible that the driver is outside the vehicle. And it takes time. It's international law, it's UN law for a certain part. So that's a complex way to make changes. Law changing takes much time, but we end up with a license for the driving car. And it's not the car that's feeling unsafe, it's the person that walks on the pavement and is having the option to get hit. So let's not talk about cars, but how to cooperate and to use the whole space. I'm not sure what the car of the future will be. It will be an intelligent one. It should be combined with your energy solutions. And you have to link it to the grid. So we have now a one-way system of grids. You use electricity in your home and send it to your car, but we want to have a two-way solution. So the car will be a part of our energy solutions in our housing districts. And what we noticed is not really the issue yet, but perhaps I'm wrong in Singapore, but how to do that so that you need a new grid and a combination of cars and housing, and then you end up with less energy questions than you had. This is the experiment with the self-driving bike in the Netherlands. It's a rather tricky one. Don't do it in Singapore. And by the way, of course, this is a joke from Google 2 years ago. But if you don't want to have a disruption, you end up what you already have. So let's find out if we can have a self-driving bike. Already, some parts of the bike driving will be an experiment. So if I may end up, Chairman, in our opinion, it's time to be a little bit unusual. For if you talk about changes, you have to be very happy about the disruption. And don't organize disruption as a government, sorry for my colleagues in Singapore, to manage disruption. Let's join forces. We are a government that's a little bit different. We accept things like that, and how to accommodate that. And that's the nice part. We have a lot of things similar, but this is a different way to approach it. So that's the real reason to be here, how to cooperate between governments and industry. Back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we are going to get to the questions part of it, and I'm going to take, I'm going to use my privilege as a moderator to ask Mark the first question, but obviously it's open to everyone else. And it occurred to me when the slides were presented that, so these questions are not prepared, so unfortunately...
It took me 2 days to prepare all the answers.
Oh, well, too bad. I'll buy you a beer.
Go ahead. Yeah, it's okay. That's the deal.
I think one of the challenges we face, at least in Singapore, is the fact that we are a relatively small nation. I mean, forget the term, right? We are a small nation, and we are part of a peninsula, which is fairly big. And while we would like to have this vision where we convert 50% of our cars to an electric system or to have an electric grid, it would also limit our ability to move outside of Singapore because other countries are not following suit. So all the infrastructure needed for charging of these vehicles and all that may not be so available in, let's say, our neighboring countries. And I believe that possibly in Europe that might be the same issue as well. This cross-border challenges where one nation is perhaps a little bit further ahead than the others in terms of adoption of such a technology. So how do you see this being reconciled?
Yeah, the first answer is never wait for your neighbors, but make a start yourself. Or if you want your neighbors to have the same pace, it will take a long time. So what we did, we made a tremendous amount of poles. So our load infrastructure is part of the concept. If you don't have enough load poles, you will end up with not an electrical solution. Then we started with our neighboring countries, Belgium and Germany. Let's start at the corridors. So don't give your answers for the whole country. Start where it's most necessary. So that was the tulip. We have corridors going into what is called the Ruhrgebiet, the western part of Germany, and we're going to the southern part from the Netherlands to Belgium, by Antwerp. So cooperating between harbors and industry is the next step. So join forces where the other parts of, in this case, Europe, think it's quite interesting to invest as well. And step by step. So never set a target, it will be 2020. It won't work. But make it very interesting to do that. And it works. It takes time, but step by step is the approach.
Thank you. I'm going to open up the floor because I was told that at BASH there are going to be a lot of questions and I'm not supposed to hog the questions. So I'm going to do the lazy way out and say, are there any questions that you want to ask now? Or should I just continue asking my questions? No questions? Okay, I'm going to take advantage of that. So the questions will be to, anyone can answer this question. And it centers around the fact that you've got autonomous vehicles, and this is a problem, I think, when I was in San Francisco, we encountered that. The acceptance of autonomous vehicles and so consumer acceptance of autonomous vehicles, there seems to be a disjoint as well. Not everyone likes the idea of autonomous vehicles running on the roads. Some people, just want to try, like to play with the system to see, to try to make the car crash or something along those lines, simply for fun. That's unfortunately the truth. I'm sure that maybe Kasia, you can answer that because you have some, I know Autonomy has some experience on the roads with that kind of behavior.
Good question. We're investigating it. So we have deployment trial running in Las Vegas with 50 BMWs every day serving people. So you can use its Lyft app. Lyft is like Uber in America, one of the competitors. Then you can book a car, and if you are within the district where we can operate, then you can be assigned to an autonomous cars. And then after the ride, we ask people a couple of questions. So we do a simple survey, whether they like the ride, whether they like the autonomous car. So we found out that people actually, most of the reviews are very positive. We have like 4.99 out of 5. So people really like the autonomous driving. It's like the very first thing is like at the beginning, if they don't know what exactly it is, they are afraid. So people, they don't trust. But usually with the subsequent rides, say 10 or third, fourth ride, if they know what to expect, They see, say, we display on the car, like inside in the car, we have a display which shows exactly what car sees. And then people, they start observing it, and they see that, okay, the car sees the tree I see, the car sees a pedestrian, which I can see too, so it's not missing anyone, so they build a trust. So I think this is the barrier for us. And basically, very young generation is very open to it, and Singaporean generation is very open. I remember the first trial we've done in Singapore was like 5 years back in Science Park. We deployed our golf buggies there on Sunday afternoon. And what people were doing is, we remember like one parent coming to the kid and telling the kid, oh, could you jump in front of this car? It's autonomous, it will stop. And it was 5 years back, and we knew that we have this LiDAR on the top, which basically sees only up to some angle, meaning that a small kid would be neglected. So sometimes there is actually more trust than the engineers can imagine.
I think that probably is, well, I hope that that is a general sentiment.
Yes, but in general, we see a trend that with the subsequent ride, people, they build trust, especially if they see what the car sees. So it's a matter of, or it's a question of how you build the so-called in-car experience so that the people feel confident or safe.
I'll just add two anecdotal examples that is in Singapore. I think most of you know the trains. We operate the north, south, east, west line. When it first started, they all are driver trains, metros. When we introduced the Circle Line, it is the first time we introduced, or LTA introduced a driverless system. I think at that time there were quite a bit of apprehension and even questions that came out to say, wow, are you sure that we're going to trust a control center monitoring all the trains, and I'm riding on a driverless train itself. But now I think all the lines, north, east line, the tail line that's coming up, and all the light rails are all driverless. So I think it's a matter of acceptance and gaining the confidence which Natasha mentioned. I think the other anecdotal evidence was in the autonomous vehicle trial in NTU, which we ran for 1 year. I think this is also a very good learning experience for us to get there as part of Mobility X experiment in the MAS. When we first put our autonomous vehicle in the campus, in the hall of residence, there were many students. I think they were very suspicious and also inquisitive about the new vehicle that is around. And now, because it's new, they are more cautious. They are very cautious to give way to the vehicle, make sure I don't cross in the path. But after several months of gaining the acceptance, they now know that the vehicle will stop when someone goes in front of the autonomous vehicle, as what Tasha was mentioning. And now they just walk in front, and then they don't look at it and look at the handphone. So this is some of the learning experience that we gotten during the 1 year trial in NTU. And I think it is something, not just the acceptance of the people riding on the AV, but the people walking and the whole ecosystem that is surrounding the whole autonomous vehicle system.
There is also one more problem which we notice is basically mentality. So each human or individual, people are usually more willing to accept a human error. So if we think of how many car accidents is happening every day on the road, it's like 95% of them are caused by human error. So when you convert it even to number of airplane crashes, it means Boeing 737 crashing every half an hour every day. And that would be not acceptable because it's a machine who is piloting the plane, while on the roads it's still accepted because it's human who is making the decision. So people, they feel confidence because there is some part of the decision they can make, versus if this is machine, the decision is out of control, so you don't have control over it. So I think this is one of the challenges.
I'm not sure if I agree.
Yeah?
Your explanation of what it makes difficult, I understand. We have a movie of a 24-hour self-driving car in the middle of Amsterdam, and it's a nice movie, for the car doesn't move. The reason is it's not only the car, it's the interaction between all the other participants in the traffic. And if you come to Amsterdam, it's a lovely place, but there are no rules, so it's free fight for all. And if you put a self-driving car with all the instruction in it, so that was one story. So never start in the middle of a city. We noticed that if you're on a highway and it's quite clear that you go for at least 50 or 100 kilometers, and I'm aware it's not in Singapore, it's becoming quite interesting to have a car on a lane that goes itself, and you can do other things. So it's an advantage. What we noticed that if you want to park your car somewhere in the city, not in the inner city, for that's too difficult, and you can make a reservation in your car, pay for it, and be quite clear that the car is going straight to the spot that's available, is becoming more interesting. So yes, we touched upon your point, the acceptance is not the same. The explanation about accidents is a rational one.
Is a rational, okay.
And people are not rational persons in all sense. So try to touch them where they have feelings, where they are not feeling happy about solutions. And then the self-driving car is becoming a little bit more interesting. For if you explain about accidents, you all are aware that every accident or incident with a self-driving car is huge. And the other incidents are also huge because we have a lot of deaths on our road, but nevertheless not as getting a lot of attention. So it's a fact, it's a feeling. So approach it from the feeling side and not from the technical side.
Yes, I completely agree. That's what I wanted to kind of
Sorry,
convey by the accidents.
Okay.
Yes, I completely agree. That's why people, they are more willing to accept human error because it's more about feeling or their own decision they made versus just a machine which is feelingless, I would
but
say.
what I'm wondering, the feeling dimension of the self-driving car is still an issue. So I'm glad you talk about it. A lot of people don't talk about the feeling. They talk about the feeling of the car itself, and I don't give a damn about the feeling of a car, by the way.
So, let me elaborate. Go deeper into that. Is it a case of the feelings of the car, or is it of the certainty of the error rate within the car itself? So, I mean, autonomous vehicles, definitely have got some kind of error rate built into it. There is this percentage, small percentage of error, but people have a much higher percentage of making an error. But the truth is, as far as the insurance company is concerned, they know what the error rate is for the car, and that is already too much for them. Whereas they have a vague sense from the actuarial perspective on the error rate that a human being would have. And they can only do that on the basis of historical and this guy's past driving record. So is that really the reason? Is that possibly the reason why there is a bigger concern on autonomous vehicles, and the reason why insurance companies are less willing to insure AVs?
Okay, now we're getting a tricky area. Yeah, because we're in contact with insurance companies. Okay, today in Singapore, no insurance company is willing to insure a truly driverless vehicle. They're not willing to insure it. But it is not a fundamental problem with the technology. It's not even a fundamental problem with questions about liability, who is liable, the manufacturer or the owner or the operator. It's not even that. They're actually quite simple. Whatever we need to cover, we cover as long as we know how to calculate what the premium should be. If the manufacturer's liability needs to be covered by the insurance, even if the premium is paid by the local operator, they're okay, willing to do it as long as they can calculate what the premium should be. So for insurers, it's more or less, it's really what you say, what's the risk and what's the liability? Because for traditional cars, even a taxi operator might have, like in Singapore, 10,000 cars. They have a kind of statistics, they got averages. Although you have no clue what the risk is for a specific driver in a specific car. You average it out, and averaged out, the business case is good, and they're looking at the same. Today, Autonomy has 14 cars or something like that driving around. You can't do statistics. Statistics don't make any sense. So therefore, the insurance companies are now struggling with determining what's the risk and what's the liability, because they have approached manufacturers. I don't think they have approached Autonomy, but they have approached other things, and they ask us, can you explain me about what the technology is about? What does it do? How do you make a decision? What is things? So that we understand what your technology is, and therefore we can calculate what the premium should be. And the answer is, this is confidential. And the insurance companies, okay, fine, we don't insure. And that is a little bit, somehow, it is like a chicken and egg type of situation, that manufacturers can't be saying everything is confidential, because you need to get insurance, you need to get like the regulators to approve it, you need the public to be confident of the products, you need fleet operators who buy a fleet of autonomous cars to be confident, and you need to open up to a certain degree. And that is, I think, going to be a very big challenge about how much do you disclose and how much is really your IP, and you can't disclose it all. And it's going to be a struggle for a long time to be, and I think something needs to force the struggle to be different, because unless you somehow need to open up some of the IP under, of course, the appropriate to dealers like insurance companies, so that they know, okay, what risk do we really, what is the risk we insure? And the insurance says, hey, we have done it in other areas. We have done it with cybersecurity insurance, where we do cybersecurity insurance, and we developed a product by working closely with the people who wanted the insurance, and looked at their operations and understand what they're doing, and understand the risk they're exposed to, and understand the consequences of what goes wrong. So I think that's one of, it's to me, big part is IP management and disclosure management, which is going there.
Okay, so let me jump on this. Sorry, just one more question. I saw your hand. Just one more question to develop further on this issue on data, because data is a big topic. Everywhere I go on when we talk about mobility as a service, is whether or not regulators, Singapore government, the Netherlands government, should mandate that such data be public domain. In other words, available for anyone who needs it, so that new business models can be built around it, new companies can be built, but more importantly, you don't end up with the monopoly of a few companies sort of taking the whole pie, because they own most of the data. So for instance, and I'll take Autonomy's case. Autonomy is doing a lot of testing on the roads now. They're collecting a tremendous amount of data, but if you follow that logic that no one else has done that in Singapore before, it would automatically imply that if Autonomy follow in the current trajectory, they would end up becoming the monopoly for autonomous vehicles in Singapore, because they would be the only ones who insurance companies would be willing to cover, because they've got sufficient data. So I want to open this up to everyone to talk about this issue on data, because I think it is a critical issue.
Not giving the answer, but I told you it's the most difficult part of my policy making. What we decided, not to make one platform to organize all the data exchange, but what we can do, if you want to make use of our roads, you have to accept that you have to exchange your data. So we start as a government not owning the data, but making our data available if you share your data with us. That can be a Google, that can be a startup, and if you are willing to do that, you're entitled to make use of our whole mobility system. The second one is not making one platform. So I was listening in Singapore how to organize it, and the fact is the government here can do it much easier than we can do it, so we can't make one platform. But what we can do, that if you're using a part of the roads and you're using a part of the road, and you have to accept that you have an exchange of data, then we are cooperating. I'm not sure if I won't end up with one monopoly. I used to be responsible for the energy sector and also for the telecom and for the IT sector. And I noticed I always started with a lot of companies and ended up with one. I'm not sure if some of you remember, everything should be IBM compatible at that time. Who's talking about it? Then we had Microsoft and everything had to be one system. So it's happening, but I'm so glad every time new startups come to the field. But as a government, you can organize how to exchange data, not owning data, but making it possible. I'm not sure if that's the answer. The reason to be in Singapore, it's done a different way. And that's the real nice part about cooperating, where we want to find out how it works. And having two kinds of governments, it's quite helpful for us, working together with the industry and the research sector. No, you have to organize it.
If I can add, from the research perspective and the industry perspective, I mean, we collaborate with government in Singapore. We provide some data to government through, say, OLIV system. So we have to report always where our cars are. So government knows how we're testing and how we're doing. And then we also we release some open source data. So we release the information like from our LiDARs or cameras. So academia can learn or can train new algorithms on the data sets which we released. And on the other side, we also need some data from government, which we're using data from Singapore government to learn how to implement, how to deploy our vehicles. So I agree that there should be some kind of consensus, maybe sort of like a road tax. Since you're using it, you have to give something back.
If no further answers, I think that gentleman there had a question. You wanted to ask a question? Yes.
Yeah, I was making comments about the insurance.
Right. Perhaps you could just identify yourself and then.
Okay, I'm Michael Young. I'm actually a local IoT company, IoT enablement. So about the insurance, I just wonder whether it's really IP sharing. Of course, there are some aspects about data exchange and the policy, but I thought maybe there is aspect about the market potential for insurance companies. Maybe this right now, at least they say that the market is so small they probably don't bother to produce a product for it. So is that a chicken and egg issue?
No, it's not a chicken and the egg. The insurance companies are actively looking at providing insurance for autonomous vehicles in Singapore. They're looking at. I had a very interesting exchange with the insurance companies about a year and a half ago. We had the very first meeting with insurance companies, myself, and we had LTA, and we had insurance companies, and we had a first meeting, and it got in the end quite hot-tempered. Okay, and then because we're talking about what insurance should cover. A little bit like the question, is the manufacturer liable or who's liable and who's liable for what? And they say, yeah, we need to have car insurance, a thing, and car insurance. What do we don't pay this and we don't pay that. I say, what do you pay? In car insurance, they say, okay, we pay for a mistake of the driver. Okay, fine. In an autonomous vehicle, if the computer makes a mistake, do you cover? Is that a mistake by the driver? The answer is no. Okay, we don't need car insurance anymore. And they go, oh shit, that's a big part of our business. Yeah, they suddenly realize that if they see everything black and white, this huge portion, which is car insurance, goes away. If Singapore, everything is autonomous fleet, okay, in theory, and everything is level 4 autonomy, and you are black and white that we only cover a mistake by the driver, the market is gone. And then they suddenly realized, okay, maybe we should have a bit more think and discussion about it. And when the thing is, oh shit, we might lose a big part of our business in the future. It's not short term, but it's in the long term. They suddenly think, okay, we need to think about this more. They saw suddenly the threat to their business. and they suddenly became a lot more open. So that is one thing. It's not, it's a chicken and the egg thing. At the moment, the challenge is a lot of the insurance is based on statistics, and we don't have statistics on autonomous vehicles. So from that perspective, it's a chicken and the egg, because you need to build a fleet up to get insistence, to get confidence. So I think you start up with very high premiums, which might be overestimated or underestimated, and it will take time to go back to a long-term equilibrium. What is more of an issue today is insurers take calculated risks, they don't take random risks. So today, a risk on a car is purely based on statistics of the vehicle. So if they start with new technology, they need to know and understand what this new technology is and new technology does and how it's verified and how and then they can calculate what the risk insurance is. A lot of a growing market for testing, inspection, certification companies like TÜV and DNVGL and whatever one said is actually to support risk assessments so that the insurance companies can better make calculations of what the premium should be for brand new technology.
Right. So thank you. I'm sure there are you know those reasons, but even autonomous cars, you don't have a driver. You don't need to insure the driver, but you need to have insurance for for pedestrians, for other people which may be run by the car. So I'm sure there is the issue about the cover issues, and even you don't have a past data for statistics. I'm sure like the new companies they are doing the testing. I'm sure they have some sort of analysis about and testing about the failure, the likelihood of failed systems, or those things. I think there should be some data or baseline can be put forward, and I still feel like is maybe insurance companies is not acting upon it because it's so small market right now, and they don't make money.
From the investment perspective, because we work with a lot of the venture funds of some of the biggest insurance companies worldwide. And actually, a lot of them are starting to invest in companies, AV companies, simply to get access to the data. So, and this is not just AV companies that go on the road, but simulators, companies that look at behavioral systems and all that, decision support systems. So, I think to Neil's point, I agree with that. There is a genuine desire or need for them to learn, and every single one of them that we talk to says, if you really can find, if SGInnovate can find a company anywhere in the world that generates this kind of data that enables them to build their actuarial models and develop policies for the car itself and third-party risk, they would be willing to pay a premium in terms of valuation.
Well, I think you're not going to get any generic pool of data. I'm pretty sure an autonomy is not going to provide anybody this internal safety data on how safe it is. It's suicide for them to do so. So this data is extremely secretive, and you will not get a public pool of data from the developers themselves. I don't think you will give it.
So if I can add up on this, so the moment we release some of the data, say perception data, meaning that everything what car sees, and you see the picture, the images frame by frame, and you see the LiDAR and radar informations millisecond by millisecond, and then you see basically, because the data are collected in autonomous mode, so you can kind of estimate even based on that what we don't want to give our algorithms away or our internal logic, which is patented, but giving information about even traces of the car, you can get some information. Some, yes, but most. Most.
Are there any other questions?
I mean,
sorry. Just let the gentleman up there.
Hi, thank you. My name is Shivesh. I wanted to ask a question about the cybersecurity of autonomous vehicles, because I think you guys are talking about the data, that how how to make people more, how to make policies around liabilities and all that thing. But once you talk about infrastructure development, and once you talk about autonomous vehicles in like mobility as a service rather than owning a car, just sharing the cars. So all these autonomous vehicles will be driven by internet and all that infrastructure. What about that? Because right now, the statistics are that thousands of hacks happens per second. I know people would be working around it and would be taking measures to make it more secure, but it's not just the accidents, it's also about hacking those autonomous vehicles and keeping them safe from the cybersecurity.
Anyone of you want to take that question?
Cybersecurity is a real problem. In China, where there is an official, first China is the hacking capital of the world, and there's a lot of incidents there. Chinese government has a reporting requirement for Chinese manufacturers that every time they have a cybersecurity incident, they need to report it to Qatar, the Automotive Research Center, and they build up a database of test cases for cybersecurity. The test case, so today the test case database is 1,700 different type of hacks which have already been done in the past. So yes, cybersecurity is a challenge. In our Singapore technical reference, we have a section on cybersecurity, and it also comes in safety. So you have safety and security by design where you really require the vehicle to be safe. So I don't think you're going to get what Fast and Furious killer cars will go on the road and start chasing people being remotely hacked. You don't have that one. You might get a much higher risk of getting cybersecurity to poor implementations risks. Although I think a lot of the primary concerns cybersecurity are actually not necessarily safety risks, but for example, privacy risk and data access risk, they are already today quite frequent. So, and of course, the system as a whole can be attacked. But cybersecurity is a risk, and there's a lot of people looking at it, and we're covering that in our technical reference.
I think that's a topic in itself almost. Sorry, Mark?
No, the answer is you're right. So what Niels is telling. So the self-driving car should be a more safe answer than we have so far. And it's not only rational, but it's also irrational. And you get a new one in the place, and the new one can be even bigger than the one we had before. So yes, you have to attack that and solve that, and be sure that you never have all the answers. And then the question is how to move forward. So for my country, it's the same issue. It's a huge problem that we have to at least address. I'm not sure if we can solve it all, but trying to find a way. And I was not aware that China would be the answer for all questions in that sense. So thank you for giving me the answer, where to find my answers.
I don't think they're the answer, but they try. Yeah, I think to reiterate, definitely the hacking. It's not just hacking of the vehicle, it's the lamppost, it's anything as part of the ecosystem, that's what Neil said. And some vulnerabilities are more apparent than others. And the car can actually be the safest area.
I think I think there is one serious side effect to cybersecurity and the fear of cybersecurity. And that is especially for connected infrastructure. Everybody's talking about vehicle-to-everything communication. The vehicle is going to talk to everything, and mobile phone is going to talk to the vehicle, and vehicle to traffic light. Today, I can already see today that there will be very severe limitations due to policies, not technical policies, and these policies are linked to cybersecurity. So, for example, a good example is ERP2 in Singapore. ERP2 is coming. DSRC, everywhere in Singapore for connecting. It's meant for tolling, toll collection, road pricing collection. It's a financial transaction. So ERP2 is designed with all the security in mind. Every box has even a special hardware-based security chip to make sure that this whole ERP2 transaction is going to be safe. When people say, oh, we have ERP2 and DSRC all over Singapore, oh yeah, we can do vehicle to everything. I don't think it's going to work. Because LTA is going to make sure that the ERP collection is as secure as possible, because you're talking about millions of dollars a day and tens of millions of dollars a day in financial transactions. They're going to make sure. So they're looking, what else can we use it for? Oh, we can use it for informing road users of, for example, broken down cars or traffic accidents, and use it for rerouting. How's it going to work? Oh, we can send the information out which we have already today on the internet. Is the user going to be able to send back information to say, I saw an accident, please update your database? The answer is no. They will not, I don't think they will allow, I don't know for sure, but as I see it today, they will not allow anybody to send any information back, because can I trust this source? And that's not been resolved yet. If you have communication from everywhere to everywhere, you need to have a way to trust your source of information. And I don't think we have good solutions yet to trust that. So that is going to be a side effect for vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to vehicle communication. How much can you trust the data you get?
Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions. I'm well aware that I'm going to leave some time for networking after the session. The gentleman up there.
Hi, my name is Tushar. I'm with Ritel, a smart logistics startup. Question is, are there different regulations, especially in Netherlands, about people versus cargo mobility using autonomous or otherwise? And how do you go around that topic? Because in urban areas, moving cargo has become a huge challenge. And our government's looking at it differently. Like in Netherlands, is it looking at it differently from people who are on bicycles or cars for personal mobility?
That's a big question. Yes, of course we have regulation for freight or for cargo. And it depends on what you're talking about. So, for example, for our inner cities, if we want to make the inner cities of the Netherlands zero emission, we have to stop the trucks coming in. So one of the examples we have that you have to unload your car and then you move forward with an electrical small car or with a bike with a lot of freight behind it. So in terms of climate regulation, yes, we have. In terms of how to experiment with truck platooning and the self-driving dimension of trucks, we try to move forward. That was my remark about regulation in general. How to make clever use of the regulation that's making already possible what we want to do. And in the meantime, change your regulation system also for freight. But we start at the highways. That's the easy part of the regulation. And again, so our regulation should be treated a little bit more adaptive. I'm not sure what is the case in Singapore, but it takes us at least 4 to 8 years to make a real change of law. And if that's the case, it's not in the same pace as the technical changes we have. So we make clever use of what is already possible. And in the field, for example, of the passenger traffic, we can do it with the cars already there, but we have, in the meantime, for the next step, change our law, and also in international law. So it depends which part of the regulation. But yes, the whole thing about what we try to do, as in Singapore, at the same time experiment, piloting, and change your regulation system, and find out what works. For if you have an answer that nobody needs, you end up with a regulation that doesn't work. So what we try to do is experiment and bring it in our regulation. Certainly for cargo, yeah.
Okay, thanks. One last question. Sorry, the gentleman in front.
Hi, can you hear me? All right, great. My name's Rajah and I work for a division in Honda known as the Honda Accelerator. So that's where we basically invest in and work with startups. So I guess my question would be mostly aimed towards new autonomy. So like in terms of the list of global pioneers, right? I wanted to understand from your personal practical experience, what do you think are some of the factors that make Singapore take a higher spot on the list than some of the other cities that you guys have been testing in, like maybe Boston or the West Coast? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. That's an easy one. Singapore, first of all, is weather. So you're always sunny, no winter. So you can test from the very beginning. 1 hour a day. Not this week. Okay, maybe not this week. But then it's very well organized in a way that if you are on the street, it's very well labeled. You have all signs. You have traffic well organized. There is traffic signals. Versus, say, if we test in Boston, you have a road which is 20 meters wide or 50 meters wide, and there is no single lane division. So it's very difficult for autonomous car to find itself there. So it's easier to start in a place like Singapore. This is the first thing. The second thing, the government is quite supportive and quite responsive as well to the needs. So this is the two main reasons for us. And yeah, we were here already doing our research at SMART, just at NUS. So easy transition.
Okay, I think I'll just squeeze a bit of time for that last question from that gentleman there.
Hello. So I have a question. I would like to understand your views on air mobility. So, like, would you believe that basically air mobility would make sense, at some point in terms of both costs and regulation, or would you believe that basically autonomous vehicle will be able to reduce congestion and the fleet will be big enough so there would not be any need for to fly, basically?
Interesting question. We're working with a couple of people who are looking at drones and drone transportation. So one of the companies I'm talking to is Wallenius Wilhelmsen. It's the biggest operator of roll-on, roll-off vessels in the world. They have 146 ships. And they are actually doing a trial at the moment together with Airbus on air mobility. It's a fantastic use case for that one, and I think it works very well. They use it to deliver parcels, documents, and other small things from shore to ship, which is today done by a guy going with a boat, and in bad weather, it's actually quite dangerous. To me, that's a no-brainer use case as long as you can manage the distance. It's oversea, relatively safe, noise is not an issue, etc. We're also talking to, I don't know how I can say it. We're working with two companies who are looking at making components for, one company looking at drones, other one making components for drones. And they are really looking at doing this for people movement also in cities. And that are not companies which are traditionally associated with that one, but they're both very large companies which are collaborating. I can't go into the details. So they're looking at it. I personally, and for that perspective, we're looking at, I'm working with them actually to advising them how can we set up a similar testbed to the Citron testbed for drones and develop the drone regulations at the same time, because it's needed, because you really go into a blank space. Even when we wrote the technical reference for autonomous vehicles, we actually looked at some of the drone regulations which have been written, because even drones have a huge challenge, because if you apply the traditional aviation standards, nothing will ever take off. That said, the risk in drones is pretty much based on what you operate where. So for example, they were looking, and the guys I work with are actually, it's a company with a big office in Singapore, but they're actually Australian. They were looking at regulations for insecticide spraying drones in Australia. The risk is bugger all. You fly over grass of wheat or corn or whatever it is, and you start spraying, the risk is very low. On the other hand, is a relatively small drone doing a high-rise inspection in the middle of the Central Business District can be a lethal object if it fails and it drops out of the sky from a 100-meter height. It can kill people. So I think drones are still very, very challenging, both for regulation perspective, because it's not just safety. It's also, I personally am very worried about noise. I don't. People think drones are great, but every time I see them, okay, I can't imagine a fleet of hundreds of drones going to the city. I think it will drive everybody nuts. That's just my personal opinion.
Yes, and then the sky full of drones. Could you imagine this? I think like what we've done. I'm sorry that it's like for Singapore, like we simulated the whole city of Singapore, the whole movement of people across Singapore with how you call it, intelligently managed fleet, and then we moved the whole demand within the city with 1/3 of the current fleet in Singapore. So we have close to 1 million of cars in Singapore, 900,000 to be exact, and we could transfer everyone with 300,000 not shared trips. So in that sense, given the capacity of the current infrastructure, I still believe we can do it quite well with autonomous vehicles without going to the sky. I'm not opposed. You asked the question if we believe. I mean,
we believe in something else. Now, what we see in Singapore and the Netherlands, that we walk more, we bike more, we use more cars, and we fly more. So somehow it's in us to be more mobile than we have been before. So yes, certain forms of traffic, for example the trains, are much more interesting in terms of in Europe between 1 and 500 kilometers to use the train and not the plane, but nevertheless it's a complex system. And I already said this morning, the flying carpet has been invented already 100 years ago, but it's still not flying. So my hope is no noise, personal answers, and just fly around, and then we can make clever use of the space. Oh, you have the answer for the flying carpet?
No, I have one more item actually regarding the drones. I actually know one use case. It's in Poland. Like one of my colleagues, they have a company. They are delivering blood between hospitals with the drones, so to avoid congestion. So I understand it for emergency, not necessarily for carrying people.
I just want to add to all the points. I think for flying cars, from the technology point of view, although it is possible, but it is not efficient. A battery powered, I mean the best battery in the world currently is about 250 watts hour per kg, compared to fossil fuel, which is about 50 times better, more efficient. So if we were to say we want an efficient drone or flying car that overcomes gravity, I don't think it will happen very much sooner in a commercial sense, in a viable sense. So if it is still a novelty, it can remain as a novelty, because it is going to be very, very expensive to fly anyone from point A to point B, not forgetting all the risks and all that. And if you want to make the flying car an aviation standard, nobody can afford to fly with 4-person, yes, yeah, thanks.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to bring this panel session to a close. There will be, I think there's some refreshments and networking after this, so please feel free to bring your questions to the panelists at that session. But now, could you join me to give them a big round of applause? So, thank you very much, fellow panelists, and let's network. Thanks.
One of my company's requirements, once I'm here, it's up to